This is Eitan Weinstein.
And I'm Naor Menninger, and you're listening to Two Nice Jewish Boys.
In collaboration with Australian Jewish News, check them out at ajn.timesofisrael.com. Also in collaboration with Arutz Sheva, israelnationalnews.com. In a little over a year, the United States will head to midterm elections. While these elections usually get less coverage and less voter turnout than presidential elections, they play a major role in American politics. Congress is the main event, with all 435 seats up for election. Also up for grabs, about 1/3 of the Senate seats and 2/3 of the gubernatorial seats. With the progressive discourse growing more dominant in the states, these upcoming elections are not only relevant for the United States, but also foretell of U.S.-Israel relations and American foreign policy in general. One thing's for sure, Andrew Cuomo will most likely no longer be the governor of New York. To discuss all this and more, we're joined today by Yiftach Dayan. Yiftach is a commentator of American politics and author of the Hebrew blog on elephants and donkeys, and according to his Twitter bio, apparently a world-renowned bedsheet folder.
True.
We'll have to see about that. I'm the bedsheet folder in our house, so we can have like a bedsheet folding competition.
We have an alpha male thing going on.
Yeah.
Okay.
The four. Do you have the four corner?
I have the
technique?
four corner. I have the very smoothly putting the shit together afterwards. It's a whole technique.
Do you do the fold and fold? Or
Exactly.
Do you do fold
exactly.
And
That's
third?
where most people get it wrong. They don't do. They don't fold twice. That's why they don't get it very smooth.
Okay.
Yeah.
But what do you? The scrunchy corners is the problem, right?
Yep.
The bed sheet itself.
Exactly.
You have to fold the corner into the corner, turn it inside out.
Correct. It gets easier after a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It takes practice.
You two are lunatics. You should go
right,
get hospitalized.
So where do we start?
Wherever you want.
So, okay, the midterm elections. When does campaigning start? Maybe give us a little bit of a background. How important is this in the United States?
Sure. Well, as you said, Congress, unlike the presidency, we know presidential elections happen every 4 years. Congress is up for re-election every 2 years. We have the entirety of the House of Representatives, as you mentioned, and we have 1/3 of the Senate. Now, House of Representatives, congressmen, we call them, they serve for only 2 years. They have to defend their seats every other 2 years now. That sounds terrible, but when you think about it, out of the 435 districts, between 80 and 90 are actually competitive. The rest of them are actually in pretty solid and safe, either blue districts, Democratic districts, mostly in cities, and rural districts, mostly outside cities. These are red seats, very safe red seats. So we actually, when we look at the two parties and the composition of the map between them, it's actually between 80 and 100 seats that the parties are fighting over. Whichever controls the majority of seats controls that lower chamber.
But there are primaries in...
Yeah, there are primaries, just like any other election. There are primaries
for the each state?
For each
county?
It's actually, it differs, it happens in different dates. So like one state would hold their primaries in a certain month of the year, and then you'll have the Democrats and the Republicans hold it together. Then a month later, another primary would happen. The primaries are a bit more chaotic, I would say. But then everything happens. The main election happens in November, just like the presidential elections. And there you have the entirety of the districts all being elected together.
But I have one more question. Is it like in other places that, like, even if you're a Democrat, you can vote in the Republican primaries, right? There's a thing that's a thing in America.
Yeah, it's actually, it depends on the state and the regulations. Some states allow for open primaries where you can vote whether or not you're a registered Democrat or Republican. And sometimes if you're a Republican, for say in a district that is blue, you would like to have your vote mean something, and you'll go and vote in the Democratic primary, even though you're not a Democrat and you don't like either candidate very much, but there's one candidate that you like less. Or maybe it's a strategic thing. You want the other candidate to get in, so the Republican will have more chance, and vice versa. So that can happen, but there are also closed primaries where you can't do that because only registered Democrats or registered Republicans can vote in the primaries. But that's just the primaries. Once you get up to November, it's all hands on deck. Everybody vote. Usually, what tends to happen, is that the leading party, the party that just won or just took over the White House 2 years before, usually in terms of how the dynamics of politics work, they usually lose control if they have it at all. They usually lose it. That happened to President Trump. That happened to President Obama. That happened to President Clinton. It uncharacteristically didn't happen to George W. Bush. Mostly, we think today because of September 11, which helped Republicans maintain this dominancy in the next couple of 2 years. But it's very common that the party that's actually in control of all levers of government, which is the Democrats right now, they're more discouraged to vote. They usually don't turn up to support or to thank their leaders. And the one in the opposition is actually more motivated, more hungry for power, wants to have more control in Washington. For example, today Republicans can't say anything about anything in Washington. They're in the minority. They can only filibuster things, but they can't promote any votes, and the Democrats don't really need them to pass certain things. So that's in terms of the House. Mm-hmm. Now, the Senate is a little bit trickier because you have only a third of the seats. We have 100 seats, 2 seats for each state. And there it's a third of each, a third of the Senate is up for re-election every 2 years. And it really depends on the composition of the map. For example, in this coming 2022 elections, you have very few vulnerable Democratic seats. And you have quite a bit of vulnerable Republican seats in this specific map. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the Democrats are going to prevail. As I said, because the dynamics are bad for the party in power, Republicans can still prevail and actually even overtake the Senate as well. That could happen, but it's a little bit harder. The states have their own game going on. Sometimes the identity of the candidate is more influential in terms of how people make their decisions. For example, we have a senator in West Virginia, Joe Manchin, that comes from a state that is very Trumpian, but is actually a Democratic senator that prevails in getting elected. And we have the Republican version of that in Maine, Susan Collins, a Republican, that gets elected in Maine, even though Biden wins it handily. So that can happen also when you go for the Senate. But generally speaking, we think the Senate is going to be very competitive because of the composition as opposed to the dynamics, while in the House of Representatives, we are foreseeing a Democratic defeat. I think Joe Biden actually assumed that he will be defeated the first day in office. He already bared in mind that his first 2 years in office are probably the only chance he's going to get to promote big things, especially in terms of budget things.
Because right now the Democrats hold the Congress.
Yeah, very narrowly. They hold
Yeah.
it. They only have
By a
a
few
break-in
seats.
tie in the Senate because it's a 50-50 Senate. And
In the Senate,
in the Senate, yeah, and they have the vice president breaking a tie.
Yeah.
And in the House, it's a very narrow, slim majority as well. So not a lot of space to work with.
So when you say that a lot of the seats are not under threat in the House of Representatives, does that mean that the candidates themselves are safe, or just the party is safe? Meaning, do the candidates have to fight for their place against other candidates from within the party?
Yeah, that certainly happens. As you mentioned before, the progressive wing, which is not the majority of the Democratic Party, it's an insurgency, you can say. They want to take over as many seats as they can that are in safe districts. That's where they feel they have the biggest chance to overtake maybe more moderate, maybe more establishment figures. And the primaries is their chance to do it. And in the same spirit, in Republican districts, you have Trumpian, in a Trump mold fashion, candidates will try to take over as many traditional establishment figures of their own in their districts in order to create a more Trumpian, more nationalistic, more in that mold of Trump kind of figure of the Republican Party. And both parties, usually what we see is usually establishment in both parties are able to maintain most seats, but there are different cases where it could go the other way.
So you mentioned the progressive. Let's also talk about the Trumpian faction of the Republican Party in a minute. Although it's interesting that the Trumpian faction is considered a faction because, I mean, Trump led the Republican Party until recently.
It's a faction, but actually Trump is dictating the terms. The party goes after Trump even when he's not in office.
Still dominates the Republican Party.
He's dominant. Many of these people transformed themselves from being a very classic capitalistic-oriented, market-oriented, corporatist candidates to a more Trumpian cultural war candidates. They did it because they didn't want to get primaried and because they had to follow the lead of Trump. But you're correct. It's not a faction. It's actually the majority. It's a question of who assimilates to the majority better.
So we're kind of veering to 2024, but who is taking on that Trumpian? Like, can you give us some examples of? I know that there's talk about DeSantis running in the 2024 election, but are there candidates in Congress today that look a little bit more Trumpian or the talking Trumpian?
Well, there are some candidates that were always very similar to Trump in terms of not of temperament, but of policy oriented. So, for example, Tom Cotton, the senator of Arkansas, is very similar to Trump in terms of the messages that he's putting across on immigration, on crime, that kind of stuff. Ted Cruz used to be more market-oriented conservative and became more Trumpian because he realized that's where the wind is blowing in the Republican Party. In terms of Ron DeSantis, which you mentioned, is actually a very interesting case because he's trying to make a case for a more restrained Trump style. So he's taking Trump policies on one hand, but he's also in some cases not embracing Trump policies. And it's an interesting thing to happen because he got elected in the primaries for the Republican candidacy for governor of Florida. That's his position, is the governor of Florida. Really sucking up to Trump. Like, he had an entire ad in which he is telling his son how to build a wall like Trump did. Like, it was a very naked trying to suck up to the leader. But then as a governor, he was a little bit more nuanced in how he governed. Sometimes bringing Democrats into the mix. He's trying to bring a little bit different, more nuanced idea of how to manage government. Mm-hmm. And that's something that maybe today is the only threat Trump actually faces for should Trump decide to run for elections in 2024. Maybe Ron DeSantis is his only threat for that candidacy.
So there's a chance he won't decide that?
There's always a chance. He's putting like clues here and there about what he's gonna do. There's also always the famous case of Sarah Palin in 2012. She fundraised a lot. She gave clues about running. She said, "I'm thinking about it. I'm about to make a decision," and then she took all of the money and didn't run. Like, she just capitalized on the fundraising and she didn't run. She did other things with the money. So it could be that's the scheme that Trump is looking at, but it's also very, very possible and maybe even likely that he's actually considering and even preparing for a run in 2024.
So,
but Biden won't run again for a second.
Biden is looking to running again, actually.
Yeah?
Yeah. It now looks more likely than not, health aside and those kind of considerations, assuming that he's in a mental state that he thinks is suitable for running. He's actually looking forward running.
It's very rare for the incumbent not to run for re-election. I don't think has there ever been Nixon?
Yeah, the last case we had was arguably Lyndon Johnson. He did run for the election, but he lost a couple of primaries and then decided to opt out.
Yeah.
Other than him, a case in which a president decided not to run for re-election, I think the only one I can think of is Harry Truman. After winning, he was already president for a term and a half because he succeeded FDR. He was elected once and he could have run again, but he knew he was going to lose, so he didn't run. Maybe that's the latest, and that's 60.
We're gonna see like Trump versus Biden again. It's gonna be crazy.
It's very possible. I actually, you can put money on it if you like.
So we talked about the Trumpian faction of the Republican Party. What about the progressives? Are they gaining ground in the Democratic Party? Are we seeing more candidates from that faction of the Democratic Party?
Well, we just had a primary. We had a special elections in Ohio just 24 hours ago, and we had this candidate called Tina Turner. That is from the Sanders wing. She's she would have been
no connection to Tina Turner.
No connection to Tina Turner. She's a very progressive candidate. She signaled that she was about to make trouble for Joe Biden should she be elected from the Democratic Party. So a very, very feisty, progressive figure. And she was actually very good at fundraising. She fundraised 2-1 against her opponent, Letitia Brown, which is from the more establishment wing, and ended up losing. So that was a shock, actually, because that was the one time that we thought that the progressive are gaining ground in this one place that they haven't managed to break new achievements yet. This is a seat vacated by a House of Representatives member that went on to serve in Biden's cabinet, Marsha Fudge. And we thought that the progressives are going to gain there and take the seat, and they didn't. They actually ended up losing. I don't think that you can draw from that a specific idea of where progressives are today. They tend to do better when they're in the opposition, when the Democrats are in the opposition, when a hatred for the Republicans and Trump is in an all-time high. It usually happens in the opposition. Now Biden is relatively popular within the Democrats, members who say that they are going to oppose him and put his agenda at risk. They tend not to succeed very well. This is only the latest example. But maybe if we had maybe closer to the midterms, things would look a little bit different. It's really hard to tell.
Is there any kind of like not statistics but numbers, like how many progressives are there in the whatever the 230 odd Democratic seats that are occupied in the Congress and House of Representatives? How many of those are progressive?
Well, it's kind of depends how you define a progressive. Some of them are self-proclaimed progressives in the House, and some are you just assume that they would be counted. So I think maybe 30 to 40. Depends on how you count. Some are more vocal than others. There's the famous squad, AOC, Ayanna Pressley, so on and so forth. Some new members that added in the last cycle, Cory Bush, Jamal Bowman. These are some new names that we've been added to the mix. In terms of the Senate, there's actually very few. There's Bernie Sanders, which we know is a progressive, and there are some that are maybe more liberal. But generally speaking, outside Vermont, which hosts two relatively progressive Democratic senators, well, actually,
we're not Ben and Jerry.
We're not Ben and Jerry's, although they could have been. Outside Vermont, not many senators who are self-prescribed progressives. Some of them are very liberal on some issues and not so liberal on others. Progressives in general find it hard to win nationwide elections. When they fight over districts, specific districts, they tend to do better. It's very local effort, very grassroots level. But when they have to win entire states, so either senator or governor, these are positions that the entire state votes for, then they tend usually to find it harder to put their members up in the ranks.
This article in Ynet, which is Israel's #1 news website, that an opinion piece that said basically that we should make peace with the squad and their friends, the progressives, and Israel should make an ally out of them because that's where the Democratic Party is going, and we need to, be more flexible. So, what do you think about that?
First of all,
I have a chance.
I have to just make a reference and say that the author of this piece is a friend of mine. His name is Rotem Oreg, and he's a very good friend. I think what he was trying to get at is that it really depends on where you stand politically. I think if you're a conservative and you throw your lot with Trump and with evangelicals and the Republican bloc, which is undeniably getting more and more pro-Israeli, then you'll probably thumb your nose at these people. And if you're an anti-Zionist Jew or Arab, you'll probably try to cooperate with them and even find solidarity with them. If you're either a center-left or even a liberal right, pragmatist liberal right, maybe somebody like Dayan, for example, you can come and try to say something along the lines of, look, we're not going to agree on Israel. Definitely not about the legitimacy of the entire state. Probably not about the occupied territories. But we are agreeing on a whole host of other stuff. We can agree on global warming. We can agree on LGBT rights. We can agree on many other things that we can promote together while maintaining our disagreements. That's a very pragmatistic, very strategic way of thinking. I don't know that it's possible. It really depends on, progressives themselves. There are different shades of progressives, so some of them are more pragmatic than others. But that's, I think, the main argument that he was trying to make. And to some extent, I agree with it. There are some progressives that are more pragmatic than others. For example, this Nina Turner figure who lost, I don't think they could have worked with her. I think she was very anti-Israeli.
With AOC, we can work.
Well, you need to try first. We haven't tried yet. I don't think people in the center left, because I don't expect the right, but people in the center left have made a concerted effort to try. Should they try? Should they invite her and try to say, let's promote some other things?
But what other things? We need them for our things. Like, they don't need us and we don't need them for environmental issues. Like,
well, I think if you're, again, this really depends on where you stand politically. If in Israel you're supporting a two-state solution, for example, so you want to increase the legitimacy of the state of Israel as a whole, but not so much of the occupied territory as part of the conflict, then you can try to get them to your side by working them, getting them to be a little bit more nuanced about their criticism. If you're not in that realm, if you're more into trying to promote as much legitimacy as you can to the entirety of Israel, including the territories that are not annexed at this point in time, then probably there's not a lot you can do with them.
Or if you just don't believe in any kind of like negotiation process right now, then it's not really relevant to lend a hand or reach out to that side of the aisle.
I just think politics right now in Israel and the States is so polarized and it's so clear where the lines are drawn. The right in Israel with the Republicans and the center left with the American center left. The progressives don't have a lot of allies in Israeli politics other than the Arab parties. But the lines are so clearly drawn that it's maybe not that practical to hope for breaking that in one way or the other. But somebody has to try in order to disprove this idea that it's impossible.
Historically, I mean, do you see kind of examples from the past on how these widening gaps and polarizations were closed in either American politics or Israeli?
Not that I can think of at the moment. It's just that it used to be so different. It used to be that it wasn't hard to find a very critical Republican, a Republican that was very critical of Israel. Some of the people who we consider Trumpist today, in terms of everything else they believe in, like Pat Buchanan, for example, a very nationalistic agenda, was very anti-Israeli and was very pro-Arab countries. And that kind of position just doesn't exist anymore, barely exists anymore in the Republican Party. So that it's just a very different reality. And on the other hand, Democrats used to be even more supportive of Israel than certain Republicans. So that it's just
there's the video that we just saw of Joe Biden in '86, I think, giving this passionate speech about if Israel didn't exist, America would have to invent an Israel in order to support our interests in the region.
Yeah. I still think that Joe Biden is a very solid ally for Israel, specifically because the Democratic Party is moving in a certain direction that is not in Israel's favor. Biden didn't budge. You could see that in the last operation in Gaza, in the last military
he threatened to cut us off the ammunition chain.
Implicitly. Well, he at a certain point, he said that he expects a fire truce. But in the initial days of the fighting, while many Democratic figures, some of them very moderate figures like the Senator Menendez of New Jersey, sounded criticisms of Israel that they didn't sound before. Everybody moved certain degrees to the left. Even the centrists moved center degrees to the left. Biden was the only one who didn't sound any criticism for the first couple of days. And even later, when he pushed for a truce, he didn't do it with explicit criticism, only implicit criticism. I can say that I listen to conservative commentary every single day, and I found that their reaction was, they were surprised at how pro-Israeli Biden was at the time that his party was less pro-Israeli than it was in the past.
But I think the standards have been lowered. I think that might be part of it, right? Is that now a Democrat who doesn't sound off about the evils of the Israeli occupation and the war crimes that are being committed in any operation is like it's kind of surprising.
Yeah,
right?
I agree. He's graded on a curve, no doubt about it. But at least you can say, if you look at Biden while looking at the rest of the party, then you see. I like to give this example of a surfer on a wave. So Biden is like the surfer, okay? And in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, for the American politics, the wave is moving, and you can maneuver around with your board and surf here and there and change the position, but in the long run, the wave is taking you somewhere else. There are movements, tectonic movements that you can't control. So Biden has to navigate the short term. In the long run, there's not a lot he can do, but he's not going to be here in the long run. And we're talking 4, 8, 12 years later that the entirety of the Democratic Party is going to be somewhere else. I will say, however, they're not going to move to the extreme left. Never. Like, they're never going to be the progressives. They can't be. The reason for that is that the majority of the Jewish electorate in the U.S. is liberal, but is still Zionist. So they're not a progressive mold. Even for the young people, the majority of them are not progressive in their view. They're not anti.
It's changing, though.
It's changing, but at the moment, it's not the case. But even if you don't look at the Jews, just look at the Democratic Party. It's a very wide tent. It's comprised of many, many, many different groups. Many of them are moderates. And without them, the Democrats can't ever hold power. They can't just win with progressives. So progressives can push to a certain degree, but not to the extreme.
But where would the Jews go?
They won't go anywhere. But that's the point. It's not only the Jews. You can look at the African Americans. People in Israel tend to think that African Americans are critical of Israel because they think of the Black Lives Matter movement. But generally speaking, the Black Lives Matter movement is a minority. Most of the African American voters are actually pretty moderate. They vote Democrat, but they're moderate. They're moderate,
more and more becoming conservative.
Most of them grew up in the church, right? A lot of them grew up in the church, and they're adhering Christians, which kind of drives them to, not necessarily naturally ally with the progressives.
That's a first reason to think about why that is. A second reason is that the Jews were very involved in the civil rights movement, and African Americans remember that and hold them favors for that. And just generally speaking, they are conservative in the way that they vote. They vote for members that they think are very likely to win in general elections. So they don't vote for progressives. They didn't vote even for black candidates there in this cycle. They voted for Joe Biden. They didn't vote for Kamala Harris or for Cory Booker in the primaries.
But on the other hand, I mean, the candidate that they definitely helped to raise to the White House, right? Barack Obama is one of the, like, I guess, predecessors of the progressive movement, right? I mean, today, there's no question that Barack Obama stands behind criticism of Israel, behind the BLM movement. Right? I mean, he's very much like a sign of the progressive movement to come, I feel like.
I'll beg to differ, actually. I think, progressives will not say today that Barack Obama was a good president. They'll say that he was a very status quo.
Of course, because that's the nature of progressives, right? They're like powering through, and anybody that gets left behind, they're like, no, he wasn't progressive.
I think even if you ask progressive, to
they're the wave.
Yeah, but
even
if you ask them to compare Obama to Biden, for example, they'll tell you Biden is more serious about the change that they think needs to happen in the economy, for example.
He's more woke.
Is more work, the infrastructure deal, the spending that is about to embark upon.
The money for free.
The money for, that's one way to put it. $4.5 trillion, that's something that Obama never did. That's something that none of the Democratic presidents in the last 60 years have done. And also, I beg to differ with your point about criticisms of Israel. I don't think Obama today promotes criticisms of Israel. I think he's trying to conserve a very official diplomatic figure. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I do agree with the point that he was more critical of Israel than other Democratic presidents. That's true. By the way, some Republican presidents were also very critical of Israel in a very critical time. I can think of George Bush Sr., for example. Yeah. So,
but Obama really left scorched grounds here in the Middle East when he...
I think the Obama and Bibi relationship is a story that can be told in many different occasions, and just as I mentioned, the wave. So Obama was also a surfer on the wave. He took it in a different direction. He was less inclined to fight off the direction the party went in. Maybe he actually was more critical of Israel himself. but it's just also the wave. It was responding to this movement, to this shift that is always happening in the American politics in the last 20 years. And it's they're all playing this game of how to respond to this shift.
Yeah, but it's a question if it's like a nice wave that you can surf, or if it's a tsunami. That's like, I guess, the real question.
Well, it's slow. It's not happening overnight. So in that respect, it's not a tsunami, but it's happening.
Yet.
Yes.
But Biden didn't mourn when Bibi left.
No, definitely not. Although he was very gracious about Bibi. Like he didn't thumb his nose at Bibi.
No, he did not call him, right? There was the whole thing there. Right, there was in the beginning for a month or something.
Of his, presidency.
He was like the last on his call list.
You mean Bibi didn't call Biden, or
no? There wasn't there a thing where Biden didn't call Bibi? There was a thing.
Well, first of all, I'll remind you that Bibi was one of the last ones to call Biden and congratulate. By the way, not because he hated Biden, but because he was very careful with Trump.
Yeah.
It took a while to realize that
Trump was offended nonetheless.
Trump was offended nonetheless.
It's the story of Trump's life.
Yeah, but it was.
That should be the biography title.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. It was a bit foggy in the first couple of days about who actually won the election, and then while it was already pretty clear, Trump was fighting it off, and then Bibi was very careful. So maybe I think what you're referring to is the calls after the inauguration, where he was making official calls to leaders. So yeah, he called Bibi relatively late.
After the Congos got a call.
Yeah.
Just...
Yeah. It could have been a personal thing.
He was on the phone with them and he got a call from Bibi and he was like, nope.
Yeah, well, it's a long history and we can go through it here. We can talk about the speech in 2015. We can talk about how Obama left Bibi in the office. There are many chapters to these relationships, but I think it's been on and on several times.
So let's talk about
Cuomo.
Yeah, let's talk about Cuomo a little bit. Just today or yesterday,
nasty old man.
Yeah. There was the AG of New York came out with the report right from their investigation that found that they still haven't decided if it's if it's criminal behavior that can be tried, but they found that he engaged. The evidence is mounting and is kind of a lot of evidence to show that he engaged in inappropriate sexual behavior.
I mean, Aziz Ansari got canceled for much less. No.
Yeah, well, Aziz Ansari, it was not a politician. And politicians in the past 2 to 3 years have come to realize, I think it started with Kavanaugh. Kavanaugh was the first one to fight this attempt to bring these sexual-oriented charges against him. And he said, no, I'm not bowing out. It also had a politics aspect to it because it was a Republican and he thought it was coming from Democrats. But ever since Kavanaugh, politicians in general don't resign that easily. In all occasions, and especially in cases of sexual harassment.
That's New York.
It's not only New York. In Virginia, you had a case 2 years ago. There was a governor who wore blackface, and his name was Ralph Northam. And he decided only to apologize and not resign, even though many people called for his resignations. But even more interesting, his lieutenant governor, an African-American named Justin Fairfax, was accused of rape.
I thought white-facing.
No, he was accused of rape or sexual assault. I can't remember which. So I'm sorry if I'm misrepresented. But it was a much harsher allegations than the ones that Andrew Cuomo is facing right now. And he didn't resign either. So it's becoming more and more common for politicians of all colors and stripes to hold on to office.
But I'm saying New York, it's like the woke capital of the world. So if the city, but also I guess the state, so like letting that go through.
But you actually, when you say the city and the state, it's actually a very interesting distinction. The state is not that woke. There are some rural parts, there are some suburban parts. The city, I agree, is the wokest of the entire world.
There's some hillbillies in the Catskills.
Yeah, but also you have to bear in mind that Andrew Cuomo is a household name in New York. His father was the governor. He's and
his brother, right?
His brother is a CNN anchor, but also he He's a very interesting character, and we can talk about the different aspects of it. But generally speaking, is considered even by Republicans to be a very competent governor, not a very liberal governor, by the way. It was in favor of school choice, for example. School choice. Some Republicans don't like the fact that Democrats are trying to, in their opinion, sabotage private charter schools.
Yeah.
And Bill de Blasio, who's a mayor, when he was elected mayor, was trying to fight charter schools and to fight their funding, and Andrew Cuomo was actually.
But I think the only thing that Republicans think about Andrew Cuomo right now is one about these sexual allegations, and two about the blunder with the old living homes,
the nursing homes.
Yes, where he sent a bunch of seniors back to the nursing homes with COVID, and the death rate for nursing homes in New York was something like 7 or 8% above the average nationally. But I think also the idea
he also
of
ate pizza right?
What?
He ate pizza like for COVID, something with I don't know, the vaccine or something like that.
Maybe you're referring to Gavin Newsom. Gavin Newsom had an incident where he went to a famous restaurant without masks.
But Andrew, I saw him, I think, I'm almost certain, eating pizza. He did this vaccination. Like there was
he tried to incentivize maybe by giving free pizza,
something like that. Yeah,
eat get pizza, a slice,
something like that.
And get a slice. But I think there's also maybe short-term memory here with the denying allegation. I mean, Bill Clinton also had tons of rape and sexual assault allegations, and then there was Clarence Thomas with the Anita Hill thing. I mean, like, people have been getting this flack or you know, if it's actually real, then legitimate allegations against them for a while, and been standing up against it. No?
Yeah, definitely. What I'm trying to get at is that we are slowly going back to that era. The Me Too movement was the breaking of the norm. It was a certain point in time in which people got canceled, so to speak, especially because of sexual harassment things. It happened in politics as well. There was the senator of Minnesota, Al Franken, who did resign because of similar, milder allegations than the ones Andrew Cuomo is facing right now. I'll remind you, Al Franken didn't touch any parts of any woman. He pretended to touch a part in a photo that was demeaning to the woman who was taken in it, but he didn't touch her, and he ended up resigning. That was right before an elections in Alabama, in which Democrats managed to take a seat from the Republicans, because the candidate there also had a sexual allegations issue. So that at that point of time, it was the height of the influence.
Spitzer.
Spitzer was a different case. It was prostitution, so it was illegal also. So it wasn't just the respect of women. Right. And but now we're seeing the gradual decline of the influence of the Me Too movement. Politicians, even Democratic politicians, are becoming more likely than not to hold on to office. Mm-hmm. They fight off the hard times. They wait. And it's interesting. This was only the first time, and you mentioned all of the problems that Cuomo faced. Today was the first time since these problems started for him that we had a poll showing that the majority of New Yorkers think he should resign, 59%. Before that, even when the media was on his case, even when Democrats were on his case, and even when very prominent figures in the Democratic Party called on him to resign, still the majority of New Yorkers didn't want him to resign. So this is actually, comes to show that he's a very influential, very household name figure in New York, and he feels like he can mount a campaign against this thing, even when the president, and we now have Joe Biden calling on his resignation, even when the president is calling him to resign, he thinks he can fight it off. We'll see if he can. Maybe even run for a fourth term. I find that very unlikely, but we'll see.
And also, he's trying to. Is it he who does the green pass?
De Blasio.
De Blasio.
It's De Blasio.
It's a municipal thing, right?
It's a municipal thing, but we're talking about New York City, so it's bigger than most states.
And it's the only city right now in America where there's a green pass.
I think they tried to do it in several other places. But it's interesting. We think of Green Pass as being more harsher than a masks mandate. But for de Blasio, he doesn't want to have mask mandates. He's doing the Green Pass to avoid a mask mandate. He thinks, and actually it's interesting, there's some bipartisan agreement on this. He thinks that it's not fair to punish, so to speak, people who got vaccinated by telling them to wear a mask. Not wearing a mask was supposed to be the prize, in quotations.
Mask or vax.
Exactly. So for him to have a green pass, to mandate that people get vaccines rather than wear masks, is a way to punish the people who are not getting vaccinated, as opposed to the people who did get vaccinated.
But is it constitutional?
Well, you have mandates in different areas and places in law. You can say that it's a regulation in an emergency time, and the Constitution does allow for prerogatives and thoughts in terms of emergencies. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a Republican judge who would have filed for it, who would have gave an injunction on it. But in reality, most judges in New York don't rule this way.
But it does kind of fly in the face of like standard HIPAA regulations that kind of protect medical privacy, right? That you can't force someone to legally, like by state law or by municipal law, to force someone to give up medical information in order to. Right.
I think you can mount several objections to it. You can say this. You can say some people on the grounds of religion can say that this is a problematic. Some people just in terms of religion, the religion doesn't allow them to take shots and stuff like that. There are several
where it gets really gray, right? Because I can make up a religion tomorrow.
Yeah, but the thing I think what he's counting on is that most people wouldn't fight it off, and that by the time that a proper legal campaign against it will be mounted,
COVID will be solved.
COVID will be at least under control. And yeah, it's actually you can make an argument, a conservative argument for why it's a good thing, because conservatives are the ones who really believe in what I said before, that it's not fair to punish the vaxxed, the people who did get vaccinated. Also, in terms of, think about teachers' unions. So teachers conservatives are mad about teachers for all sorts of reasons. They feel like they do whatever they want. They don't want to go to teach because they are afraid of COVID. And now some teachers are not getting vaccinated because they feel like they can't be forced to get vaccinated. And teachers, unlike other people, always interact with many people who didn't get vaccinated, which are children. So if a teacher, regardless of his political beliefs, doesn't get vaccinated, he can be a spreader if he gets COVID. And Republicans are saying, oh, this is our chance to get them in line, because if there's a blanket endorsement of a green light, of a green pass, then everybody needs to get vaccinated. Teachers, nonetheless, notwithstanding, and then you can get them finally to fall in line with the rest of the people.
Mm-hmm. America.
Yeah. Here, it's just green pass for everyone. No questions asked.
It's not even a question.
We just bend and take it.
Oh, well. So, we got to cut things short a bit today, but thank you. It feels like we could talk for another 2 hours.
But you'll come again, right?
Sure.
You didn't suffer with the cake and everything.
Yeah, the cake from Naor's grandma was amazing.
Yep.
Yeah.
We have it on record now.
We can do a bed shit
competition.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it should be an Olympic sport by now, really. I mean, everything's an Olympic sport by now.
If dressage
what
is
about
an Olympic
cake
sport.
eating?
Yeah.
What is dressage?
It's the dancing horses.
Oh, come
It's not
on.
not even the ones that jump, just the ones that dance.
They're going to lose it. But at some point, the Olympics is just going to have taken it too far. No one's going to want to watch.
Yeah, probably.
Beer drinking.
Cake eating. Yiftach, you're on Twitter.
I am.
But do you tweet in English?
Very rarely.
Seldom.
Yeah.
Okay, but
maybe I should change that.
Yeah, so Yiftach, just spell your name for the audience.
It's Yiftach, and then the last name straight afterwards is Dayan. Yiftach Dayan.
And you do lectures?
I do.
So people can reach out, Zoom lectures abroad, etc.
Yeah,
Cool.
definitely.
Very cool. Thank you
Their
so
English
much.
is not a problem, as you guys can tell. So reach out. Do you have a website?
I have a Facebook page.
A Facebook page. So reach out. Yiftach Dayan. You heard how to spell his name. Look him up. It's going to be surely an interesting lecture.
And before we go, guys, we do this on our free time. First of all, Arutz Sheva.
IsraelNationalNews.com.
Yes, we're sponsored. They share our content, so check them out. Also, Australian Jewish News, ajn.timesofisrael.com. Check them out for the Australian angle. The lockdown, they're under lockdown, so support them. And last but not least, we accept donations, so please help us out. Go
Yes.
to twinjb.com/donate and donate money to us.
Thank you so much, Yiftach.
Thank you for
Thank
having
you
me.
for coming.
Bye,
Bye,
guys.
guys.